I was never a student of Professor Andre Bete.
May I have your attention, please? Are you able to hear me at the back? Yeah. Good afternoon, and thank you to all of you for being here. Along with Professor Beteille's family, we have all come together today as colleagues, friends, students, and admirers of Professor Andre Beteille to remember, to celebrate, and to honor a scholar whose work shaped not only the Department of Sociology at the Delhi School of Economics, but the discipline of sociology in India and far beyond. More importantly, we are here to remember someone whose presence left a deep and lasting imprint on generations of students and teachers. Before we go any further, I invite all of you to rise and join me in observing a moment of silence in his memory. For us at the Department of Sociology, hosting this memorial carries a particular sense of meaning, as Professor Beteille shared a lifelong association with Delhi School of Economics, Department of Sociology. And his ideas, values, and intellectual commitment remain woven into the everyday life of our department and into the discipline we continue to practice and teach. His scholarship was marked by clarity, rigor, and intellectual seriousness. He helped us think with care and precision about inequality, caste, class, and social institutions. His work taught us not what to think, but how to think, and how to do so responsibly. Yet beyond his formidable academic contributions, he will be remembered as a teacher and mentor who valued conversation, disagreement, and reflection. Those who encountered him, whether in classrooms, seminars, or through his writings, often speak of the precision of his arguments, the clarity of his expression, and the disciplined seriousness with which he approached academic life. I remember clearly the module on Weber that I took with him as part of my MPhil coursework more than 30 years ago. In hindsight, it feels entirely appropriate that I worked on an essay on Weber's Science as a Vocation for this course. What stays with most of us a lot, however, are the informal moments with Professor Beteille walking up to us as we sit in the lawns of department, initiating conversations that were very friendly, probing, and intellectually demanding for all of us. These encounters have left a lasting impression on so many of us. Today's gathering is not only about recalling Professor Beteille's many achievements. It's also an opportunity to reflect on what he and his ideas have meant to so many teachers, students, and scholars. His life and work remind us of the importance of thoughtful scholarship, of a sustained commitment to teaching and research, and of nurturing curiosity, openness, and integrity in those who come after us. We will now hear from our colleagues and students and friends who will share their memories and reflections on his life and work. Through their voices, we hope to honor not only the scholar Professor Beteille was, but the legacy he leaves behind. Thank you once again for being with us here and joining us in remembering Professor Andre Beteille. I now invite my colleague, Professor Janaki Abraham.
Thank you again for being here. We have a long list of people who are going to speak. We have messages that have come in, some video messages, and a short clip of Professor Beteille speaking. We have his family here. His daughter is also going to speak. So please do stay till the end. Okay, I'd like to call upon Professor Pami Dua, former director of Delhi School of Economics, who's going to also read out messages from other directors of the Delhi School of Economics. Can I give you the chair? It's okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I start with my own message. Heartfelt condolences on the sad demise of Professor Beteille. He was a distinguished academician, great institution builder, and a wonderful colleague. He played a major role in the development and growth of the sociology department since its very inception in 1959, as well as the Delhi School of Economics. We are very grateful to him. We remember him very fondly for his contributions. And I may mention that I had the good fortune of interacting with him on a few occasions when I served as director of the Delhi School of Economics and each time I was very touched by his warmth. May his soul rest in peace, and may God grant strength to his family to bear this immense loss. Now, I have been given the responsibility to read out some messages of former directors, mainly of the Delhi School of Economics. I start with Professor K.L. Krishna, a close friend of Professor Beteille. He writes, deeply saddened at the demise of Andre. He was an illustrious sociologist who brought much luster to the Department of Sociology and the Delhi School of Economics with his long association and path-breaking contributions since 1959. I had the good fortune of being his colleague and residential neighbor for several decades. Please convey my deep condolences to his wife Yasha and daughters Radha and Tara. Sharing your grief, K.L. Krishna. Next message is from Professor Sundaram, who was former head of the Department of Economics and former colleague in the Department of Economics. He himself is present here today, but Ram said I have to read your message so you can add to it later. So he writes that he's deeply saddened. He will share more views. May his soul rest in peace. Then we have Professor Pulin Nayak, again former director of Delhi School of Economics. Extremely sad to learn of the passing away of Professor Andre Beteille. He was an inspiring scholar, a dedicated teacher, and a wonderful colleague. His extensive writings established him globally as an academic of the highest caliber. His contribution to building up the stature of the Delhi School of Economics was immense. May his noble soul rest in peace. The last message I have is from Partha Sen, Professor Partha Sen, former director of the Delhi School of Economics. Professor Beteille was a towering figure in the Delhi School of Economics. As a student, one used to admire him from a distance. The admiration was based on my sketchy reading of his work and the respect he commanded from his students. Years later, when I joined the economics department as a reader, our paths did cross. I really got to know him after he retired. He was the one to reach out. I was still in awe of him. We got along really well. Other colleagues and former students have written about how he was a patient listener. It is a view I would agree with wholeheartedly. He held strong views on many matters, but did not try to impose those on others. We would meet over meals at our respective homes, not often enough though. I knew that he walked in the Lodi gardens in the evenings. I would often waylay him and we would walk together. Quite often I would go to his residence in Jorbagh and we would talk on our way to Delhi University in the cab that he had rented for the day. He would ask me to join any discussion if a friend of his happened to be in Delhi. He would seek my opinion on some appointments that he wanted to make as chairman of ICSSR. Once he rang me up and said, Partha, I know you're going to say no, but do you want to be considered for the vice chancellorship of the university? I, of course, did say no, as he had guessed I would. I brought up these points to highlight the fact that we were close. I regret not having interacted with him in my earlier years as a faculty member, and also in the later part of his life when he had become reclusive. He has left memories that are a trail of affection. I will miss him. He was a unique academic, as others have emphasized. He was also a true representative of a dying breed of academics in India who were institution builders. So this message was from Professor Partha Sen, former director of the Delhi School of Economics. And I'm sure that all directors of the Delhi School of Economics would vouch for the massive, major, significant contributions he made to this institution, for which we will always, for generations to come, remain grateful to him. So thank you all very much.
Is Professor Rohini here? So Professor Anand Chakravarti was among one of the first batches after Professor Beteille joined in 1959, 1st of July, I believe, 1959, Professor Beteille joined the department. Professor Anand Chakravarti will tell us a bit about those early years and more, I'm sure.
Friends, although Professor Beteille is no more, there are two reasons why, at least in my mind, he will live on forever. The first has to do with certain circumstances as a student of his, and the second, circumstances associated with being his colleague and a researcher. Taking the first, I joined the department in 1960, and Professor Beteille happened to be my tutor in the very first term. Now, to explain why I remember him and will remember him always, it has to do with my undergraduate days in St. Stephen's College. For some odd, some foolish, imbecile reason, I had a fancy for using bombastic language in ordinary conversations. For instance, I didn't have a wristwatch, but a friend of mine or a batchmate who had a wristwatch, instead of asking that person, what is the time, I would ask, what hour of the day or what hour is registered in your chronometer? Another, I've forgotten all the, but a second that I do remember, if I notice that someone's telling me a lie, instead of saying, you're lying to me, I would say, you are guilty of a terminological inexactitude. I can't even pronounce it properly now. So you can understand that that bombastic flavor was carried forward when I wrote my first tutorial. But then I was suitably disillusioned, suitably, what should I say, squashed when on the last page, that is after my last paragraph, Beteille's remarks in red across the page, write simply, to the point, avoid stylistic flourishes, wrote subsequently as an MA student. And indeed, I should say that that's something that I haven't forgotten. And all my subsequent writings, post-tutorial writings, have tried to, be to the point, to put it as simply as possible. Now, as far as being a colleague and researcher is concerned, when I joined the department as a teacher in 1968, at that time, the study of caste was preeminent, especially the ideological basis of caste. So, so whether it was the study of kinship, of ritual, of the economy, or politics, all these studies were pursued, as it were, under the shadow of caste. And Beteille argued, and I remember in a 1969 paper, without denying the importance of the study of caste, it was time to turn to other areas of social life in rural India, especially around the ownership and control of land. That is the study of class relations. And that's something that influenced me profoundly. And I think whatever writing I did post my doctoral thesis had that flavor, had a lot to do with class and class relations and material exploitation. There's a lot more that can be said, but I'll leave it at that.
We have a short clip from Professor Alan McFarlane, who's at Cambridge University. He had done a series of interviews, more than one, with Professor Beteille. They are in the public domain, and you can watch them.
My name is Alan McFarlane. I'm a professor at the University of Cambridge and a fellow of King's College. And I have just heard the very, very sad news that André Beteille, a long-term friend, has very recently died. My first thoughts are for his widow, Aisha, and his two daughters, who have become friends over the years. So I send my greetings and commiserations to them. But as I often think with really important people in my lives when they die, I feel as if a great tree has been felled just above me. André was about 7 years older than I am. He was 91, and I've known him for an awful long time. I see in my diary my first reference to him was in November 1978, so that's 47 years ago. And I went to a seminar paper by A. Beteille on natural inequality, very good, showing that supposedly egalitarian societies have ideas of natural inequality. And that very goodness continued through the years ahead. I read a great deal of what he'd written. I visited him and his family several times in Delhi. He spent periods in Cambridge. I interviewed him, which are on YouTube, several interviews. He's one of the few people I interviewed more than once, and they're always very good interviews. So if you search for interview of André Beteille, you should be able to find it. And what struck me was that he was the nearest among contemporary thinkers to de Tocqueville. De Tocqueville, the great French sociologist, was one of my, and is one of my heroes. And perhaps there's something in André Beteille's background, as is well known. His grandparents were one of them was French, so he had this French admixture to him, and I think it's this that gives him his cross-comparative wisdom, that he can compare the West, which he knows a lot about, and caste societies. So this tension within himself between his two origins and his life's experiences led him to theorize about particularly the central question of equality and inequality, on which he wrote the standard works and edited the Penguin book and so on. So he was a great thinker on that, but he was also important because he brought together anthropology. He did anthropological field work, and one of his monographs is an anthropological one, but he was also a sociologist, aware of more general macro-sociological theory. And combining those disciplines, combining those backgrounds, and putting it all into very clear, precise, logical prose. There was no obfuscation, no concealment. You could follow his arguments really well. And so for many years I drew on his work and was inspired by him. I was delighted that he went to become, I think, Vice Chancellor or Chancellor of the university in Assam, in Shillong, where I was born, and that gave us another association. And later, the association was increased when I came to work with his wife Aisha and daughter Radha on various books that they published in India of mine, interview books and other works, and the work of my mother. So I think of all the scholars of that slightly above me generation, he is one of the very most important in my life. And my wife and I were very fond of him. I will just end with one small anecdote which has always remained with me. He came and spent several weeks, months in the department, and at one point in the 1980s, early 80s, he came and was at the end of the corridor where I had a room, and he had a key to his room, and at the end of his time he said, "Here's the key to my room, Alan." And I said, "No, keep it, you'll be back." And he said, "Yes, I will be back." And then he said, "And when I come back, I expect you will be the William Wise Professor of Anthropology." Now, I'd never imagined that I was even being thought about as the future top chair in anthropology in Cambridge. But he just had great faith in me, as I did in him. So I send my thoughts, and will be thinking of you all at the memorial service. Thank you. My name is Alan McFarlane. I'm a professor at the University.
Professor Malvika Karlikar was Professor Beteille's PhD student, and then, of course, a very close family friend.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Just tells you how many years I've known Professor Beteille. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, this morning, as I was just finishing some editorial touches to the Indian Journal of Gender Studies that I've looked after now for longer than I'd like to think, I thought, have I put the comma in the right place? And a voice within me said, that's just what Professor Beteille would say. Have you watched out for the punctuation? Are you sure that that comma should be there? And so that is the nature of the relationship, which goes back so many decades. I first met him in 1968 on the roof of Aisha's parents' home in Jorbagh. He was clad, nobody's mentioned his sartorial style, but Andreda, as I used to call him, was very particular. And he was dressed in a crisp white dhoti and Punjabi. And we sat on the roof, and Aisha served us delicious anchovy sandwiches. I don't know if you remember that. Those were the days. And I had just come back from university, and I wanted to do research. My cousin Ashish Bose, who was a demographer, had said, go and meet Professor Srinivas and go and meet. He was on first name terms with them. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I did my MLit under dear Professor M.S.A. Rao. I don't know how many remember him. He was such a dear gentleman, very, very kind. And after that, I moved on to my PhD with Professor Andre Beteille. And the topic was rather tendentious, because by then I was living in Kolkata with my husband. We were married. And it was student politics. It was a complete change from my earlier work, which was on teachers, which was student politics in West Bengal. And I still remember we had many, many discussions, and he was very interested in my field work. In those days, you must remember that there was, I don't know how we ever communicated with our supervisors.
There was no email. There was no sort of a phone that didn't work half the time. Postal services were slow. So I suppose I must have posted my chapters to him, because I do know that he was extremely meticulous and went through everything. All of you would, any of you here who have been students of Professor Oberoi would know his hallmark green markings in the columns. Professor Beteille was much more conservative, and it was always in black, but one would dread the arrival back of any chapter with many notations. And after that, when I moved away from the department, I taught for a while, we were colleagues, moved away from the department and into gender studies. I'm not terribly sure that he was convinced of the validity of gender studies in those days. And in those days, we used to call it women's studies. And we kind of skirted around it, and he never ever really said anything that was critical, but I think he had some doubts. But later, when I showed him copies of the Indian Journal of Gender Studies, he was very pleased, and he said, you do realize that you are doing something that would be of use to generations that follow. Latterly, of course, as we all know, he wasn't keeping terribly well, and I would go and see him. We would sit, but he was ever the archetypal gentleman. And one of the last occasions, I remember I asked him, then our conversations were always in Bangla. Somehow he reverted back to Bangla, and I asked him in Bengali, "Kemon achen?" I must add over here that to the very end, I remained terrified of him. I was totally petrified of him, no matter, though I knew there were going to be no red marks in the column and no theses to be submitted, but I was always apprehensive of how he would react. It's not that he was uncaring or unkind. It's just that I felt that I could not match the preciseness of his, that I wasn't precise enough, I wasn't concise enough. I think that probably came from his early scientific training. Anyway, that's an aside. And so when I walked in, I asked him, "Kemon achen?" So he looked at me and he said, "Ami," that's me, "Ami achi." And that meant I exist. And that's true. He didn't exist for much longer after that. But as far as I'm concerned, he continues to exist in the peripheries of my consciousness today and forever. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Sundaram, Professor of Economics, Head of Department here in D School, and a close family friend.
Thank you so much. First of all, I must thank our director, Professor Ram Singh. I must thank Professor Ram Singh to organize this function as a Delhi school function, to make it more inclusive of all departments of this school. Also because I think Andre represented in many ways the quintessential Delhi school visualized by Professor V.K. Rao when this was set up, as an interdisciplinary unit. So I think that is one major thing. Of course, it is no exaggeration to say that with the passing away of Professor Beteille, I think we have come to an end of an era of the stalwarts in social anthropology and, in fact, social sciences in general. In fact, over the years, both departments of economics and sociology have lost so many stalwarts. I think we have to now count our blessings on who remain with us but it is still, no matter what, no matter his age, it's a terrible tragedy for everyone who ever knew him. The only other thing I might briefly mention is that I was fortunate enough to have partnered him in an experiment which we carried out here when we had, I think for the first time, joint economics and sociology seminars which ran for a while. I don't know whether it continues now, but I think at least as long as I was in charge of the department, I think we were managing to do that. And I will still remember those days very fondly. And my heartfelt condolences to the family, Tara, Radha, and Nisha. Thank you.
Professor Amrit Srinivasan, professor at IIT Delhi and a student of Professor Beteille.
Forgive me if my talk is a bit hatke, but I was part of the adjacent generation to Professor Beteille, not, as many of you here, later generations. I was taught by him in '68, so I feel I can have a joking relationship to cheer us up with his great memory. You know, if Auguste Comte, at its birth, the religion of humanity, then my beloved Professor André Beteille, your beloved Professor André Beteille, who are gathered here today, he was its priest. Not a high priest, not a deacon, or certainly not the archbishop, but a parish priest. He took care of his flock and his creed. I, one of his very early converts, can vouch for that. Fresh with the arrogance of good marks and a woman's only college, I had come to the university in July in the late 60s to choose, yes, we were allowed choice then, between psychology, philosophy, or sociology. And I had proposed to sample lectures in all three to come to my decision. His was the first I attended. Bas. That was it. My choice was made. I stood converted, and there has been no looking back, no ghar wapsi for me. As they said at my retirement, that's how old I am, at IIT, a colleague said, Amrit may leave sociology, but sociology will not let her be. I think Andre was very much responsible for that. This was true for many of us. I need to personalize because I don't see many of my peers, but it was true for many of us. Andre's commitment to the discipline by some homeopathic magic, straight from Malinowski, transferred itself to us, his students, dispassionately. That's very important. We were never part of his project or his plan, but we always felt we were in his care. We would be sitting huddled and anxious. This is the late 60s when classes were still in the main building and the gloomy corridors had benches. And we would be sitting there worrying away, most of us women. What is this strange new field called sociology? There was no undergraduate prehistory then. There was no undergraduate course in sociology. Kinship, descent, the newer leopard skin chief, what did it all mean? And why should it mean anything? We nervously protested to each other. And then Andre, in his starched white dhoti, would come up to us, kneel in front of the bench, and soothe away our ignorant fears. In this religion of humanity, he would say, we have to go by the way one is not to understand our own reality. This cosmopolitanism, Esha, was a rare gift Andre gave to us. It may have been clothed in the jargon of comparative sociology, but at its heart, it was parish love, parish care. The same that would see him translate N.K. Bose, his teacher, works into English. No one else in the Delhi department did that kind of thing. The deeply personal imprint he left on his students' lives was so self-effacing, I came upon its truth only now, after his passing, after reading a very poignant piece by a young neighbor of his, Chiki Sarkar, I don't know if she's here today, in the Indian Express. I don't know, as I say, whether she's here, but she mentioned that she experienced at the end of his life what I experienced at its professional beginnings in Delhi school. Going through the archive of memory, and it's rather long at my age, I remembered it was he I showed my literary, jottings to. I had shown them to no one else besides my mother. Why? Because he asked about us. I wrote a passionate and completely politically incorrect piece to the Times of India protesting his being bypassed for professorship. Why? It is another matter that more worldly wise persons prevailed and the letter was never sent. But what made me write it in the first place? Why again did I confess to him and him only my difficult home story, marrying out of the Sikh community? I would mimic my mother. You could have at least chosen a Punjabi. She was perfectly educated, but she wailed after meeting my Tam Brams tutor from Bombay. Tell me, Amrit, Andre quietly interjected when I was telling him, is he dark? And there you had a whole semiology and sociology of class, race, community, dispassionately laid out before me to soothe me. Finally, most significantly, why did I choose Tanjore for my field, for my Cambridge PhD? Amongst our immediate peers, only he had traversed the north-south divide before me. Again, dispassionately, Andre had, quite against the intellectual nationalism infecting D School, encouraged and pursued my Cambridge affiliation and my so-called exotic Devadasi Tanjore data on my behalf for my PhD. So, in extending my condolences to the three special women, and Neil, the alternate generation young man in his life, I'm really condoling with all of sociology and the universities everywhere. They don't make them like Andre anymore. And I'm quite sure when I fairly soon also stand in queue at the pearly gates, I will be able to attend Andre's lecture explaining to St. Peter, gently, persuasively, why he should rethink the cumulative inequality of the good and disperse it and allow some of us and more sinners like myself in. I give my condolences to Aisha and the family and thank the department and for their loss. I'm bereaved with them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Professor Abhijit Dasgupta from the Department of Sociology and who is a student also of Professor Beteille.
Well, I came to know Professor Beteille in 1975 when I joined the department to do an MA. I came to know more about him. He was only 25 when he traveled from Calcutta to Delhi to join the department. And at that time, Professor M.N. Srinivas was the head of the department. He was interviewed in the month of June, and he was told to join the department in July, which he did. And he writes in his memoir that I traveled from Calcutta to Delhi. That was the longest journey I took over at the time in 1959. M.N. Srinivas was head of the department at the time. Dr. V.K.R.V. Rao was the vice chancellor of the department. And of course, Andre Beteille and few part-time teachers were there. They were thinking of making Delhi School of Economics an intellectually vibrant place, a center of excellence of higher studies. And they had full support from the Vice Chancellor, and M.N. Srinivas took an active role, I must say. And Beteille and Srinivas designed the courses for BA and MA students. That was the beginning. And I was one of his tutorial students. I always wanted to know who really influenced him intellectually. And I should like to share what I learned from him is that he had three figures really. One was N.K. Bose, Professor Nirmal Kumar Bose, or known as Nirmal Babu, who was Mahatma Gandhi's personal secretary. He was Beteille's teacher in anthropology department in Calcutta. And just now she mentioned that Professor Beteille translated one of his books from Bengali into English. He was the first man who really influenced Professor Beteille in his writings, and particularly in doing fieldwork. The second person was M.N. Srinivas. Beteille was very fond of Srinivas's writings. And Beteille read extensively, discussed with Srinivas. Sometimes he agreed with Srinivas, but sometimes he disagreed. But let me share one thing with you. Beteille was not Indian society without conflict, without violence is utopian. He never agreed with that idea. He taught to learn about human society, to know what reality is all about, is his mother. He has written extensively about his mother in his memoir. She was actively involved in social welfare work in Calcutta and various other places with Beteille's sister or her daughter. And I think, and Beteille was in school, and that was the time he learned life of the poor, the marginalized, and I thought I never had that opportunity because he was not well. To what extent that influenced his mind? Let me add an anecdote with this. She wrote a letter to Gandhiji when he went to Calcutta in 1946. And she wanted to give that letter to Gandhiji and went to meet him. When Nirmal Babu said, no, there's no time, you have to come some other time. So she left the letter with Nirmal Babu and then left. A couple of years back, a Dutch anthropologist doing field work in Bangladesh found out from the archive that old letter written by Professor Beteille's mother to Gandhiji saying what was happening in Calcutta in 1946, how it displaced people in the city, and what sort of help he can offer. So she was the person I think we have to keep in mind, influenced him in many ways. Now, if you have to ask me one area, and he has written very extensively in various areas, identify where he really liked to work. And I have no hesitation in saying that it is the agrarian structure which was his first, which he liked most. He began his study in 1962 in Tanjore with this, and his book came out in 1965, Caste, Class and Power. He didn't stop there, he continued. And he went to Bengal, in West Bengal, and worked in a district called Burdwan after that, and completed his work in 75. And then he wrote a book called Studies in Agrarian Social Structure, which he dedicated to his mother. So first 10, 15 years, he was doing work only on agrarian structure. He was a comparativist. So he wanted to compare Tanjore and Bengal, Tamil Nadu and Bengal. And in several essays, he had written about that. But just to give you an example that came out from his work is that people think if you have poverty, landlessness, you are likely to see revolution, change. That is not so. He argued that in Bengal, where you have all kinds of problems, but change didn't come the way that one expects. Similarly, that's almost the same case that you find in the case of Tamil Nadu. But anyway, coming back to some other points, I think, which worth remembering today, that is, he wanted to see Delhi School of Economics as one big family. It's not that one department in one corner. And in this, two persons who helped him were V.K.R.V. Rao and Professor Rao and Professor Srinivas. And there were exchanges between economics department and sociology department and also with geography department. So that Professor Amartya Sen and so on. So that was an important point that I wanted to make today. But finally, let me point out that Beteille wanted to see the department as a place where students from all over the country or from different parts of the world coming and join for higher studies. And it did happen. The UGC recognized the department as a center of advanced study, and we had students from different parts of the country and also from abroad. And quite a few of them were supervised by Professor Beteille. So with this, let me stop. You can imagine the kind of contribution that he made to this department, to this place, which we call D School. And finally, I'll just say that students are going to miss him, and someone like me who was a student and also a colleague for a very long time, we are going to miss him as a good student, as a good human being. And his colleagues and his friends, they are going to miss his intellectual work, his commitment to scholarship, and so on. But as long as this school is here, I'm sure Beteille's name will be around. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very briefly, for the benefit of students who didn't know Professor Beteille, we just wanted to mention that Professor Beteille was university emeritus. He received the emeritus status in 2003, and of course, until his death. He was a National Research Fellowship professor. He was awarded, as you saw in the slideshow, the Padma Bhushan in 2005. He was a corresponding fellow at the British Academy, London, from 1992, and an honorary fellow of the Royal Anthropological Institute, London, from 2001. He was Chancellor Ashoka University 2014 to 2017, Chancellor of Nehu, the Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, Chairman of Indian Council of Social Science Research, and Chairman Center for the Studies in Social Sciences, Kolkata, from 2002 to 2005. We've got slides on all the books, and all our students I know are familiar with the work and read it as part of their syllabus, so I won't go into that, but we just wanted to mention this. I'd like to call upon Dr. Anjali Bhatia, who's a teacher at LSR, to read out a message that's come from Professor Jonathan Parry, professor at LSE.
So this is the message from Professor Jonathan Parry. I first met the young Dr. Andre Beteille. He must have been in his very early 30s, and I almost a decade younger, in Cambridge in 1966. He was a Simon Fellow in Manchester at the time and on leave from the D School. I was preparing for fieldwork in India, and Andre had to come down to visit supervisor Edmund Leach. Edmund had then somehow prevailed on him to become my mentor for the duration of my field research. He went on performing that role for the next 6 decades, reading, commenting, and invariably improving most of what I ever wrote as an anthropologist. Our last meeting was in early 2025, and in the long stay, in the long interval between, I and later my wife and children would stay with the Beteilles in Delhi, and whichever of the Beteilles was passing through London would stay with us. It was a family relationship. For me, Andre was a truly inspirational teacher, a long-standing colleague, and a loyal and remarkably patient friend. Though he was old when he died, had not been well for some years, and none of us can have been better prepared for his death. It comes upon us as a terrible jolt. The time will come to say so much more of the importance of his academic work, of his qualities as a teacher, the only professor I ever knew who could be in his office every day with the door always wide open to students and colleagues and go on being so extraordinarily productive, and of his many personal characteristics and qualities, his uncompromising commitment to getting as near to the truth as possible, his sense of what really matters, his fair-mindedness and ability to listen, his sharp but never malicious sense of humor, and his appreciation of poetry. For the moment, however, what I wish to express is a raw consciousness of the gap that Andre's departure leaves in the lives of his friends and admirers. Jonathan Johnny Parry.
I'd like to request my colleague, Dr. Tilak Kumar, to read out a message from Professor Chris Fuller, also at the LS.
Personally and also professionally, one begins to look at in terms of, and his, of course, illustrious contributions and what we are going to miss. Just last week only, just a few days ago, Professor Beteille happened to be around, although he was not so mobile. But being a faculty member at the department that he nourished and nurtured for so long, probably we are going to miss personally and professionally. But there is this message from Professor Fuller, which I will be going to read, but I can just say, along with the way the joint, gathering of the students, teachers, and the academic community that we have to celebrate, of course, the life. I just had begun to join the department in July 2002, and it was just a few weeks later that I was, in fact, visited by Professor Beteille in my room in the second floor, along with Professor Dasgupta and Professor Kaka, and just actually trying to say that teaching is the prime concern of a teacher, and we must actually devote our time, energy, and this is something that I take as a lifelong learning. So Professor C.J. Fuller from London School of Economics gives this message that I was very sorry to receive the news of Andre's death, and for me, like others who knew him for a long time, this sad event marks the end of an era. Andre was a friend, colleague, mentor, and guru in India ever since I first met him in his office in the D School early 1972, when I was a PhD student from Cambridge doing fieldwork in a village in Kerala. He asked me how my fieldwork was going and quickly realized I was finding it very difficult and was not enjoying it very much. So he told me he didn't like fieldwork and how it was all right not to enjoy it. He was the first senior person ever to tell me, and which came as a real relief, and he offered both sympathy and useful advice. Others seemed to think I should just work out my fieldwork with myself and get on with it. But Andre was very helpful in discussing research problems about the relationship between caste and class, and that number of confusing that we see particularly in Kerala and also in India probably became one of the major reference points for my lifelong engagement with caste and subsequently class and other related issues. I read them immediately, many of the writings coming from Professor Beteille, and both in terms of many later occasions, we became very, very good friends. In later years, in India, I didn't need so much of sympathy, but his advice on whatever I was trying to do was always welcome and very useful. I also remember countless enjoyable and interesting conversations in Delhi and London over many years about all manner of things, from disagreements about whether Hindu temples are really a proper subject for sociologists to study, or to memories of Manchester, and I will miss him greatly. So this was the message from Professor C.J. Fuller, London School of Economics. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilla. This is a good time for us to hear Professor Beteille in his own words. So we're going to...
I honestly believe that no scientist, no scholar can advance his work without the aid of an institution. In my case, the institution which has played a very important part in my personal development, in the development of my own career, is the Delhi School of Economics and the Department of Sociology within the Delhi School of Economics, which I joined at the age of 24 in the year 1959. And my ideas, as they are today, have been shaped significantly by the environment and the milieu provided by the Delhi School of Economics, which was an outstanding institution when I joined it. It had outstanding individuals. So I don't want to just call it the Department of Sociology or the Delhi School of Economics. The individuals are also important. But who made those other individuals what they were? To some extent, it was the Delhi. So there is a reciprocal relationship between these individuals and the institution which shapes them. The institution shaped me, but to some extent, I think I also to some extent shaped the institution. The persons who came before me, two great names I want to mention. One is a sociologist, M.N. Srinivas, whose name I have mentioned many times, and the other is an economist called K.N. Raj. They were the most significant influences on me, and they were very significant figures in the Delhi School of Economics. And I don't want to say that they were geniuses who shaped the Delhi School of Economics. No, they were themselves in turn shaped by the Delhi School of Economics. So it's a reciprocal relationship between the individual and the institution.
And that's interesting specifically because you were there for a vast span of time.
I'm still there.
You're still in the Delhi
School of Economics. I'm Professor Emeritus.
Still, yeah. So what?
So one thing that I looked at the Handbook of Information, and I found that my name is still written among the staff, faculty, Andre Beteille, Professor Emeritus. And I told the head of the department that you must always keep my name on it. This is one request I make to you after I pass. Till then, my name must always be there. I'm very proud of the fact that I belong to, you know. I honestly believe that no scientist.
Worked very closely with Professor Beteille in the ICSSR and was, of course, a professor of economics here in D School.
Thank you, Janki. I want to thank both Janki and Ram for organizing this event, and I'm very glad it's taking place here in the lecture theatre of the Department of Economics, because Professor Beteille was really a professor of Delhi School of Economics. It was not just that he was a great sociologist, one of the greatest this country has produced, and his role in creating the Department of Sociology was, of course, outstanding. But much more than that, he was a professor of the Delhi School of Economics, and he was important in shaping the Delhi School of Economics as a great institution, which it did become. I'm also particularly honored to follow him in the message which he gave about the role of institutions in shaping individuals. And I personally have benefited a lot from that. I wanted to say I'm not his student, but that's not true. I am his student. Even though I was not a student in the classroom with him, I benefited a lot, and I'll explain as I talk. I knew Professor Beteille. He was an eminent professor when we were students, but we were students in economics. We didn't really attend his classes. And I later joined back the department as a faculty. We became colleagues, and I learned a lot as interacting with him on various issues relating to common interests of the school. But we became particularly close one summer in 2005. I was in my office, and Professor Beteille walked in, and he said, "Do you want to become member secretary of the ICSSR?" He had just been appointed chairman, and he was facing an issue because the person the government had appointed as member secretary decided to take up a tenure in Boston, and he wanted somebody to come quickly. So I don't know, I was in I never thought of leaving academics, but I agreed and joined Professor Beteille in the ICSR, which were two of the finest years of my life when I'd originally thought of only working as long as he was there. A scholar can play in governance. I learned a lot about how a good scholar can also be governance. Governance doesn't necessarily mean simply ordering. A gentle art of communication can play a major role in governance. And I was fortunate that I had to work with Professor Beteille in managing ICSR and its multiplicity of institutions, each one of them with a varied range of academic problems. Some of them continue to have in other academic institutions. But with Professor Beteille, I realized how dialogue and communication can help in resolving these without necessarily resorting to fiat as the only source of solving problems. I learned a great deal from Professor Beteille about the art of effective governance, something which is there in his writing, and particularly in his writings about institutions. He underscores how governance can matter, but he also demonstrated it in his limited involvement with effective governance, both as chairman ICSR and as chancellor of NEHU, both of which I had opportunities to observe. And he was a remarkable agent of governance. I learned a lot. The 2 years I was in ICSR, every morning, whenever he was in town, we would sit, have a cup of tea, and talk about everything, including what was happening in the newspapers. I can't talk to you about many of those things. Some he has written about, but rest are there in my mind. I will certainly miss him. I would like to convey my deepest condolences to Isha and his children. It's hard to put these things in words. but he will live on in all our minds. His work will remind us, and I would urge you to read the work not merely as examples of sociology, but as something which all social scientists must engage with.
Professor Radhika Chopra was a student in the department and then a colleague of Professor Beteille.
Thank you. I'll keep it short because I know how many people are here to remember him and have lots to say. I was his student. He was also my supervisor in my MPhil and the youngest colleague at the time when I joined. And it says a lot for the civility of the department at the time and of Professor Beteille himself, who came up to me and said, Radhika, you must call me Andre. It didn't go past my lips at all. So we compromised and I called him Professor for a long time. I took his course, 20th Century Marxism, that he had introduced. And he, oh, sorry, yes. And he gave me what to me was an alarming assignment to present Max Weber. And in sheer terror, I went off to bookshops to find Max Weber's Economy and Society, 2 very fat volumes. I finally found them at a pavement bookseller, smashed beyond recognition and all for 50 rupees. That's why I got them for 50 rupees. But I read them virtually page to page and came and presented the seminar that I was meant to. And I was sitting there gently trembling under the table, and he was sitting at right angles to me in the small seminar room of the department where we had our MPhil classes. We had MPhil at the time. At the end of my presentation, didn't say a word. He just nodded. And you know, he had these very fine sort of wrinkles, as it were, on his eyelids. And they acknowledged, I felt, by that small gesture. And I think that's how we remember our teachers, through these small gestures. He also set me on a path which I followed for a long time, of writing about visual anthropology. He presented me first, he gave me rather, an assignment, you could say, of reviewing film, Forest of Bliss, for visual anthropology. And when it was finally published, it became part of a larger debate with Jonathan Parry and Alexander Moore and Akosh Oster and others. I was just so proud of having been part of that. And I got one copy of Visual Anthropology, and I came and I presented it to him, and he looked at it and he said, "Is this your only copy, Radhika?" And I said, "Yes." "Then it belongs to you, but I'll read it." Again, such a moment of affirmation. And he opened a doorway, he opened a pathway for me to consider visual ethnography and visual anthropology. And I taught it until I retired. So it's one of those things that teachers do. And he was an archetypical teacher.
And colleague, Professor Rita Brara.
So Professor Beteille was, of course, an eminent scholar, with a strong social conscience, but he also had a captivating sense of humor. He was, in fact, a thrilling storyteller. Some of my most memorable stories, and his most memorable actually, is his first meeting with the great anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss as a young sociologist. So he was nervous as it happened, and when he met Claude Lévi-Strauss, he told him, "I've heard of you from Louis Dumont and David Pocock," to which Lévi-Strauss disarmingly replied, "And I, of course, have heard of you from many people." And he narrated it in his typical, characteristic, self-deprecatory manner. And another of his favorites and mine was when he happened to be filling out a form which required him to specify his religion. And Ram Guha was sitting in his office. As he hesitated, Ram Guha quipped, "Your religion? That's easy. It is sociology." And a third story, which I recall, was about Jean-Paul Sartre, who was sheltering unwanted immigrants in Paris. At which point, a French policeman was asked, "Why don't you arrest him?" And Professor Beteille narrated both his response and his defense. The cop said, "France does not arrest a Voltaire." So these were very thought-provoking anecdotes that have actually stayed with me. I'll turn next to his intertwined interdisciplinary and institutional life, which of course many others have touched on already. What was striking was that he thought economics had something to contribute to sociology. And he argued that the foundational principle of economics, that life is constrained, is very significant because economists also recognize that life is constrained by both material and social factors. Of course, he was also acutely aware of the significance of the Department of Sociology being housed in the Delhi School of Economics. And he also thought it enhanced its reputation. But he didn't leave it at that. Equally, he involved himself with the limitations of economics as a discipline, and he interacted with fellow economists at the Delhi School. So, just one instance of, his studies in agrarian social structure, which Abhijit touched on already. He was working in North Bengal, and he looked into the category of jotedars. It's a tenurial category. And he deconstructed that category effortlessly as including cultivators, tenants, and owners, rather than being a monolithic class, whereas economists had taken it to be just. And of course, he analyzed economic texts, and such as Amartya Sen's Inequality Re-examined. And here, he wasn't afraid of being critical. He said that Sen's lack of attention to the normative underpinnings of power inequalities was striking. To conclude, I'd once again like to mention that his commitment to both institutional and interdisciplinary life was both remarkable and enduring. I know that he once declined a very prestigious chair at a university in Britain, and because he felt that there was no place that was really better than the Delhi School of Economics. It was his Camelot, like it has been for so many of us assembled here. It is our hope that the intellectual tradition he fostered in the Delhi school, step by step, and sometimes by leaps and bounds, literally, will continue to inspire its future. Thank you, everybody.
Can we have the video, Professor Ram Guha?
I was never a student of Professor Andre Beteille, though I almost became his colleague in the year 1993 when I was appointed to a job in the Delhi school, which I couldn't join because of family reasons. But I had a very long and close connection with him, and in many ways regarded him as my intellectual and moral anchor. I first read him 10 years before we met. In 1979, after finishing an MA in economics, I was thinking of studying sociology. And one of the books I picked up of his was 6 Essays in Comparative Sociology. A slim but incredibly penetrating collection of essays, which gave me the sense that you could be based in India and yet do research relevant to other parts of the world. Some years later, I read his book, An Idea of Natural Inequality, which in some ways is his most sharply argued book. It includes a brilliant critique of Louis Dumont, as some of you know. I first met Professor Beteille in the year 1988, when I had recently joined the Institute of Economic Growth, and he, of course, was in the Delhi school. And very soon we became close friends. After I finished work at the IEG, I would go towards the bus stop to take the bus back home. I then lived in South Delhi. And often Professor Beteille would be in his study, banging away on his beloved Olivetti. And I would peek in, and he would stop, and then we would start chatting. And our friendship continued from then, which is 88, 89, almost until his death. He was, of course, as I've said, a profound intellectual influence on me, as on many other people in this room. Also, a kind of exemplar and a model of what the scholarly life was. His personal and intellectual integrity, his interdisciplinary approach, his commitment to teaching and institution building, his ability to communicate complex ideas in such accessible and often elegant prose. So he was a model. He was also a friend, and despite the difference in our ages, I mean, he was almost a quarter of a century older than me, so in effect old enough to be my father. We had many exchanges in person, through email, and of course on the phone after I returned to Bangalore in 1995. And at first sight, it was kind of unlikely friendship. There's the difference in age, which I've already mentioned. There's the difference in temperament. Professor Beteille taught in the same place for 40 years. I had 5 academic jobs in 10 years and then left to become a freelance scholar and writer. Professor Beteille, tackled big questions, inequality and power. I looked at more micro issues like forest policy, the social issue of sport. Professor Beteille, one of his mottos, which came from the French thinker Talleyrand, was above all, avoid an excess of zeal. So as many of you know, he was restrained, completely non-polemical in his writings. I was excitable, irritable, sometimes angry and harsh in what I said and what I wrote. But maybe it was these differences in our temperament that appealed to him. And, he is gone, but what he wrote, what he said in private to me and what he wrote in public, his example, his character, will, I think, guide me for the rest of my intellectual life. I was never a student of Professor Andre Beteille.
From Jamia Millia Islamia, is also the secretary of the Indian Sociological Society.
Dear colleagues, members of Professor Beteille's family, friends, scholars, students, and members of academic fraternity, On behalf of Indian Sociological Society, Delhi Sociological Society, and Jamia Millia, I stand here today with a deep sense of humanity to pay homage to Professor Andre Beteille, a doyen of Indian sociology and social anthropology, a towering intellectual presence and truly an institution in himself. Okay, sorry. Am I audible now? Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm not his direct student, and many of us who are present here, who have not been his direct students, have encountered his work and have read and have benefited from his writings on social stratification, caste, class, inequality, social change, and education. Professor Beteille laid the foundations of empirical sociology in India. His work offered enduring insights into complex relationships between tradition and modernity, hierarchy and justice, structure and agency. His scholarship was never abstract in the pejorative sense. It was empirically grounded, theoretically informed, and methodologically rigorous, shaped through a sustained dialogue with economics, political science, law, and political theory. He was deeply committed to cultural pluralism, liberalism, and constitutional democracy, values that resonated not only in his academic writings but also in his public interventions. Beyond classroom and the field, Andre Beteille served the academic community with rare distinction at the institutional level. He was steadfast guardian of academic autonomy and scholarly rigor. His tenure as chairman of Indian Council of Social Science Research, that is ICSSR, where he consistently upheld the highest standards of independent and ethical scholarship. He also served as Chancellor of Northeastern Hill University, contributing significantly to the strengthening of higher education in the region. In his later years, he was Chancellor of Ashoka University, where he played foundational role in shaping its academic vision and intellectual ethos. In recognition of his extraordinary contribution to the discipline, the Indian Sociological Society honored him with its Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009. His scholarly eminence was further acknowledged through numerous national and international honors, including Padma Bhushan and his election as Correspondent Fellow of British Academy, a real exceptional distinction for an Indian sociologist. Yet, if one were to ask what constitutes his most enduring legacy, it would not merely be these honors. His writings continue to be part of core curricula in Indian sociology. But more importantly, his legacy lives on in the minds and practices of his students, as we have heard many of them talking about it today. As many have noted, while Padma Bhushan recognized his contribution to literature and education, it is his legions of students who offer the most lasting testaments to his life's work. The kind of the homages and tributes which are being poured talk about Professor Andre Beteille. We have not just lost a person, but it is very important that to carry forward, and we should not lose the distinct way of doing sociology. And I think his students, scholars have a lot of responsibility to see that we foster the way he practiced sociology. He passionately believed in fieldwork, in disciplined empiricism, and writing that was merciful, jargon-free. And I think that's very important. His lectures were models of clarity. His prose was marked by charming lucidity, crisp, elegant, and accessible. And that's very important, that how we build a connect with our students. And I think this was a first lesson. And I would also like to share a personal anecdote. When I appeared first time for the position of ad hoc lecturer here in the university, I was there in the corridor and I was feeling very nervous. And I just wanted to go when I told that she's not wanting to face the interview. He said, "Oh, I'm also nervous, and interviews do make you nervous, but you are not going to lose anything. If you get in, you gain, and if you don't get in, you don't lose." So that was such a way to encourage, and that was my first brush with him here. And then I met him, of course, I had an opportunity to meet him at Jamia. He would come at the invitation of Professor Mohini Anjum, who were great friends. So, this is something which really impressed, and his simplicity, which is very important and which many of us have just heard from his students, friends. If one ever aspired to be a good social scientist, Professor Andre Beteille was the ultimate model. One very important thing which I was reading through these tributes and homages was his intellectual generosity. How he welcomed critique with grace, never allowing disagreement to corrode personal relationships, which is very important, a lesson to learn. In a world where academic rivalry often overshadows collegiality, Professor Beteille stood apart as a scholar who combined intellectual rigor with deep ethical conduct. So on behalf of ISS, DSS, and Jamia, I extend our deepest condolences to his family, students, colleagues, and the wider academic community. His moral and intellectual legacy will continue to inspire generations of sociologists, social scientists, and thinkers committed to understanding society with honesty, empathy, and discipline. Professor Beteille may no longer be with us in person, but through his work, his students, and the standards he set for our discipline, he remains very much present. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to request Dr. Shashi Bhushan Singh to read out a message from Professor Tulsi Patel, who was at the Department of Sociology and is currently in Jodhpur. She was unable to come.
I'm just reading the way it is. It is very sad that Professor Beteille is no longer with us, but his contribution to the discipline of sociology and to the Department of Sociology at this school will always remain alive and valued. Though I had read his work during my MA, I met him in the department in 1978 when I came to teach at Miranda House against the leave vacancy of Mrs. Usha Khurana. His special command on theorizing social inequalities has stood out. His deep insights into theorizing inequalities across a whole range of social experiences, from agrarian relations, caste, class, education, affirmative action, has stood the test of time. Also, how inequality is reproduced. His casual remarks over coffee in the coffee house on the UGC policy to institute centers of inclusion-exclusion universities for the 10th plan was that is an issue of nearly 80 plus each year. Once he pointed to me the photographs of all fresh admissions, which he would go over to put the face and name together, a gesture that made the freshers at each breath a celebrity. Rest in peace, Professor Beteille.
Thank you. Dr. Geetika De, teaches at Hindu College, will read out a message from Professor Panini, who lives in Mysore, retired from JNU.
Thank you, Janaki. This is a note from Professor M.N. Panini, who lives in Mysore, and this is what he writes. Professor Beteille had a big hand in making me a hybrid social scientist by nudging me to switch from my craze for mathematical economics to focus on the intricacies of social relations. Soon after my MA in economics, I took an appointment with Professor Amartya Sen, who was teaching economic theory then, about the prospects of working under his guidance for a PhD. He asked me to view Srinivas's concept of dominant caste from a game theoretic perspective and suggested that he would be willing to collaborate with Andre Beteille if he agrees. So I approached Professor Beteille with a proposal inspired by Barthes' article on conflict among the Swat Pathans, in which he had used a simple game theoretic model to study conflicts. Professor Beteille took one good look at it and set it aside and quizzed me about Marx to expose my shallow understanding of conflict. He told me to read Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte to begin exploring the notion of social conflict. It was then that I realized that he knew his mathematics too well to be deceived by the games of game theorists and sensitized me to unanticipated complexities of social life before attempting to cast them in neat mathematical models. Early in my career, what impressed me was his nuanced notion of theory that made allowances for the antinomies of societies. Since I was a great fan of Professor Amartya Sen's sociology, because he was teaching us about the impossibility of constructing social welfare functions, he made it a point to show me his review of Sen's book on economic inequality and asked me to comment on it. I thought the review pointed out that since economic inequalities get congealed into institutions, they cannot be seen from the lens of dyadic relations that neoclassical economists tend to adopt. I must admit that as a fan, I switched my loyalty to Beteille in the course of writing my M.Late dissertation on social conflict in rural India. I remember for the Viva Voce, my external examiner was Professor Surajit Sinha, who quizzed me sharply on the distinction between rural studies and village studies. I'm proud to say that I got to know Professor Beteille when he was residing in the Fellows Court of Guire Hall as a young lecturer. I used to call him on Teachers' Day every year, except that last year my call went unanswered, perhaps because he was too frail to receive it. He was one of the most fair minded judge of academic accomplishment that I know. I must add here that although he was a friendly mentor to me, I used to be tongue tied in his presence, perhaps because I was so much in awe of him. Just the other day, when I phoned Mrs. Isha Beteille to offer condolences, I had a brain fog, being unable to put in words to convey how he has left a gaping hole in my life.
Thank you. Thank you, Geetika. Professor Ram Singh is here. He's director of Delhi School of Economics.
I did not have the good fortune of getting a chance to interact with Professor Beteille, like several of you in this room had. But I can claim as he was. I had heard of him a great deal, and it so happened that sometime in 2001, I can't be sure about the year, but it had to be around 2001 or 2. So I walked in a room of economics department head. That time I was a research associate here. So, and I saw that someone I had not seen before was talking in a way that seemed quite formidable to, and he was talking to economics professors. Professors whom I found very formidable. So I saw a two-stage hierarchy, intellectual hierarchy at work. So I don't even recall why I went to that room in the first place. And in a few minutes I spent there, I came out and inquired, who is this man talking to these people, my professors like this? I was told it was Professor Andre Beteille. I got a sense of his stature, the kind of command, respect he commanded. Subsequently, when Professor T.C.A. Anand, I joined the department as faculty. It was after I joined the department as faculty, Professor T.C.A. Anand went on to join member secretary ICSSR. And I asked him why was he going to join ICSSR. He said, well, when Andre Beteille asks you to do something, you can't say no. Several such instances are the occasions I had to experience it through reflections, his depth and respect that he commanded. Today, when I heard him in that video, I'm going to ask Anuja to share that video so that we keep it in DSA repository archives. What the points he makes about how DSC as an institution influenced his thinking, and in return, he influenced and contributed to DSC's stature and thinking and its intellectual profile, is an important question in a relationship between institutions and individuals. We describe the relation to be endogenous, but that's what he is talking. So one feels, deeply inspired. And today, when this event started, I could not be in the beginning of this event because I had a lecture. And I had asked myself, should I go to lecture or reschedule, postpone my lecture and come here? So answer was that, knowing his contemporaries, Professor Suresh Tendulkar and all, and it also came out in the discussion today that he accorded great sanctity to teaching. So I thought that if one were to ask him, he perhaps would say, start, you better teach and then come. So that is what I did, and that was my way of paying tribute to him. Thank you.
Professor Gopa Sabharwal, who is his PhD student. Gopa teaches at LSR.
So I'll try and keep it short. Professor Beteille entered my life as he did the life of generations of students at the department in his formal role as teacher, and that is how we first got to know him. As a teacher, it became clear very soon that he would always teach the first period lecture, and those of us who reached campus early could see him arrive daily, almost like clockwork, and then settle down to read his lecture notes. We also learned quite unexpectedly. It is Professor Beteille who pointed me in the direction of substantial work on ethnic identity in Soviet ethnography, and my dissertation became a comparison of the approaches between the US and USSR. This was the comparative perspective being put through use to understand the same problem in a range of contexts. This became the very rich base for my PhD, which was to study social divisions in an urban setting in South India, writing my thesis. And that formal interaction continued. For that purpose, Professor Beteille expected me to be at the department every Saturday at 9 a.m., and that meeting was not negotiable. It often meant Beteille jumping the railing to open the door from inside to let me in. Once we were done with checking how my thesis had moved, he was quite okay with discussing and advising on the various courses I may have been teaching at the time. In passing, he mentioned that he had read every single reading on the undergraduate syllabus, a comment that was so inspirational that I came back and shared that we could achieve the same. At a personal level, post my PhD, I decided to revise my work and expand my analysis to look more closely at the link between ethnicity and class. The three indicators of income, education, and occupation may be broadly categorized as comprising class indicators and play an important role in the lives of people and cannot be neglected if a realistic picture of social life was to be constructed. Professor Beteille was quite pleased with how the work shaped up. And then something unexpected happened. He offered to write the foreword of my book. It not even struck me to ask him, because he was not a man who believed in patronage or favor. He expected his students to carve their own place in the academy, so to say. So I was very honored that he asked. Not only did he reiterate my findings, he ended with a statement with the closest he could come to showering praise. He wrote, and I quote, "She has attempted to do on a broader canvas and with more advanced analytical tools what I had sought to do 40 years ago in my book, Caste, Class, and Power. Nothing could have been given me greater joy than to read those words and get that affirmation. Thank you, Professor Beteille, for being the person you were."
Gopa. I'd like to call Professor Nilika Mehrotra. Please bear with us. We're almost at the end, but we have Tara Beteille is going to speak, and we're going to see a lovely little clip of Neil, who's here, being taught Rabindra Sangeet. So don't go. And after there's tea and coffee and samosas and biscuit outside. So please bear with us. Just a few moments.
So a lot has been said, and lot that I wanted to say. I joined the department 30 years back and stayed here till 1999, the year he retired. So those were the heydays of the department. Professor Oberoi, Professor Andre Beteille, Professor Veena Das, and many others, you know. And we were terrified. I was totally intimidated by their presence. I came from anthropology, and I had only been an observer, looking at him walking through the road that we can't walk on now. So from Chhatramarg, his residence, to this place, we would see him walking up and down, and always awestruck. He would come to my department, that is anthropology, on the invitation of our professors, and he was always available for discussion. But when I joined as a colleague in the department, I think you could imagine my state of mind. So the first week or within 10 days, I think I had first lecture. I had taught earlier, but this was first lecture at D school. And I get a knock on my door, and I see Professor Beteille standing there, and he said, "Let's go and have coffee." And this was really, something. I went with him, and he just asked me, "Are you a nervous teacher, Nilika?" So I said, "Of course I am nervous." So he said, "Don't worry, even after 30 years of teaching, I'm still nervous." And that has stayed with me. Professor Singh spoke about how he took lecture today. When I heard the news, it was my lecture at 11 o'clock and another lecture at 3. I went for my lecture, spoke for 20 minutes, only about my interactions with him in the class. And from there, we went to the cremation ground, and I returned and took my lecture. I think that was my tribute to him, because what I learned from him was this great sense of commitment to the teaching. And if I have learned a bit from him in terms of my teaching act, I think it's worth it. It's really worth it. Because Professor Beteille, I think, left such an indelible impact on my mind in terms of his long conversations, in terms of the fact that being such a senior scholar and teacher, he was available for me, who was not his direct student, to have conversations around my work, about the university, about the world affairs, anything that you could talk to him about. So I think I have such fond memories of him. And he's left such a strong legacy, such high standards he had set up for us to follow. They are very difficult to follow. But we, in our own ways, in very small ways, continue to actually, see him around and still learn from him. So I, on my personal behalf, and also on behalf of my Center for the Study of Social Systems at JNU, pay tribute to him, my deepest condolences to the family, friends, and students. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilika. Can I call on Dr. Meha Thakur, who teaches at Hindu College? She'll read out a note from Professor Anandita Chakravarti, who teaches at IIT Kanpur.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, I'm sorry. The note is titled, "The Professor Who Was Always Present, Remembering Professor Beteille." The news of Professor Beteille's passing was saddening, though we knew he had been ailing and had celebrated his 90th birthday 2 years ago. Both age and health were not on his side, yet it is hard to bid the final farewell to a beloved teacher. I first met Professor Beteille in 1993 when I joined the MA program in sociology at Delhi School of Economics. Professor Beteille used to kickstart the day with the 9 a.m. class. Being a late riser those days, I was often late and groggy, but the lectures made us sit up. Marx, Durkheim, and Weber were presented as the most exciting people in all their brilliance and shortcomings. Professor Beteille's excitement was contagious. It made us spend hours at the Ratan Tata Library in conversation with those dead white men. When Weber's fragment of a magnum opus, Economy and Society, proved unfathomable, one just needed to poke one's head in his office for an appointment. Usually it was given on the following day. It was a privilege to have him as a tutor and instructor in our MA MPhil courses. The early 1990s were the days of postmodernism, and we picked holes in the Eurocentric arguments of the dead European men. He did listen to our discontents, but remained resolutely unimpressed. He pushed for clear writing, thorough reading, and critical thinking, critical even to critical thought. For him, academic fashion and ideology were the enemies of academic integrity, and he was not shy to state them front and center. He did not agree with the idea that universities were sites of political activism, but at the same time, he was respectful of political work. Professor J.P.S. Oberoi used to say that the only time he saw Andre pleading was when he begged the authorities for the release of a student of the department who was arrested during the emergency of 1975. Though he was not my supervisor, I had sustained interactions with him during my PhD days. Whenever I visited D School, Professor Beteille was always predictably present. We discussed fieldwork, writing, and ideas. The advice he gave was concrete, practical, and doable. They made more sense when things got tough. My elder child was born when I was writing my thesis. Anyone who has written a thesis with a baby knows the steep climb. One day I met Professor Beteille and I had bundles of notes, photocopies, and books with me, and I must have looked dazed. I complained of lack of time, sleep, and focus. In his no-nonsense, matter-of-fact tone, he told me that in this new regime of motherhood and doctoral studenthood, I will become more driven and disciplined. You will finish your dissertation sooner than those with plenty of time in hand. Do not unnecessarily worry. Those words stayed with me and helped me negotiate the trenches of PhD life. For Professor Beteille, academic excellence stemmed from disciplined work, the invisible base, the real edifice of all things intellectual. His daily routine was a testament to his belief that it was physical labor that produced ideas. The constant clattering of his typewriter on the ground floor corridor of sociology department at D School was a sonic proof of his academic ideology. Legend has it that he scaled the corridor walls on holidays and Saturdays to enter his office. Years later, when I met him at his Jorbagh residence, he was suffering from a bad back, and I was told that years of hunching over the typewriter were the real culprit. Our academic journeys would not be as exciting or even possible without teachers like Professor Beteille. Professor Beteille, a professor with an unpronounceable French name and a deep commitment to a German sociologist, an impeccable English accent, and often clad in Bengali dhuti and Punjabi, speaking fluent Bengali will be remembered and missed by those he taught and mentored during his long and illustrious career. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I hand the mic to Tara, I just want to say that there was this long line of people who were going to speak, and I said I'm not going to talk, but I need to say here that Professor Beteille was my teacher in the MA, was my MPhil supervisor. He retired soon after I started my PhD and continued to read my work, whatever I mean, all the chapters of my thesis, and then later whatever I wrote, I would take, and as so many have said, he would be quick to respond. But I hope in the coming days one will write about one's relationship, because his passing, even though, as so many have also said, that we knew he was unwell and he was 91, which is a wonderful age to live to, but his passing has really shrouded us, and so many of us, in sadness and a sense of a loss. But I'd like to hand over the mic to Tara. Thank you for waiting.
Thanks. I have about 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is too short a time to thank everyone who made such a big difference to my father's life, his many students, colleagues, and those he interacted with, and in the later years of his life, his doctors and caregivers. Thank you so much, and thank you to those who would visit us regularly at home the past few years, Gopa, Janaki, Rita Brara, Dipankar Gupta, and many more. I cannot name everybody, but please do know that you were very special to him and to us. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. I wanted to say a little bit about my father as a father and as his daughter. I've been lucky to be able to come back to Delhi ever since I left about 25 years ago. I return fairly frequently. About 10 years ago, my father would start repeating this line from Julius Caesar every time I had to leave. And it was this. It is where Brutus and Cassius are getting ready for battle. If we do meet again, why then we shall smile. If not, this parting was well made. I have to say, it would really annoy me. And I would ask him, why are you saying this? Do you plan to die while I'm away? And he would just repeat it again. And then about a year ago, he stopped saying it altogether. Now, I know there are some students in the room, so I wanted to share a few things that I learned from him that have helped me through my studies and in my career. There are many things, but I'll talk about three. The first started when I was very young. He would keep saying, "Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words won't harm me." Didn't exactly understand what it meant when I was a child and getting into fights. But as I grew up, I understood what it really meant was, people are always going to say things to you, things that you won't like. But don't let it get to you. Don't personalize criticism. Just hear what it is and move on. The second came later when I was doing my PhD. I'm trained in economics, and I was training in economics. And I discuss all these things with him, and I wanted neat, clean answers. That's what we have that's what we strive for as economists. And he had this verse by Ezra Pound that he would recite for me. And it was this: "When I carefully consider the curious habits of dogs, I am compelled to conclude that man is the superior animal. When I consider the curious habits of man, I confess, my friend, I am confused." And this is what he wanted to tell me, that there are no neat and clean answers to difficult social problems. Human behavior is illogical, it is contradictory, and we have to understand that. The third one is something that he would say to me in Bengali. It was if I'd had a fight with somebody or was getting really annoyed and was plotting my revenge, he would come and say to me, "Mago, mon choto korish na." And what that really means is, you don't have to be mean just because somebody has hurt or upset you. Let it go. And finally, what I want to share with you is a little bit of things that my father loved doing. He loved teaching, which you know, but he loved Robindra Songit. And here's a little clip of him trying to teach his somewhat naughty 2.5, 3-year-old grandson some Robindra Songit. It's a short one. Thank you.
মোর বিনায় ওঠে কোন সুরে বাজে 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 কোন নব চঞ্চল ছন্দে মোর বিনায় ওঠে কোন সুরে বাজি
বাজি I was never a student of Professor Andre Beteille.
How lovely. And it's so nice to have Neil, and the other two grandchildren aren't here, but Professor Beteille, like Chiki Sarkar said in her piece, he would look at the photograph and he'd say, "I look at Neil's picture all day," and I play with Naira or Ria. Thank you so much for being so patient. I'd like to end by just a round of thank yous. Thank you, of course, for all of you for coming here. We've had the director of D School, who made this a D School event, Professor Rohini Somnathan, who's the head of department, who ensured and immediately said we could have this room. It's more accessible than the Vivekanand Hall. The office staff of both economics and sociology have really worked hard to make this possible and pull off various things. And of course, our wonderful students. Without them, it's impossible to organize everything. They've worked so hard. Many of them, if you can just give them a round of applause. They've worked hard, thinking of detail, preparing the PowerPoint, trying to think of how we can have this live telecast, and so on. So thank you so much. I'd also like to really thank my colleague, Professor Gopa Sabarwal, who found this beautiful clip, which was magical and so appropriate for today, and has really been part of our team. So we also look forward to similar collaborations with our college teachers who are very much part of us. Thank you so much, and we invite you for tea and coffee and some samosas.